Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night chat on FedPM Pro. I'm looking forward to talking with you all tonight and talking about some really fun, crazy stuff like transitions. They are always exciting and crazy, so I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and thoughts on the craziest transitions that you've ever been involved in and some of the challenges that you ran into. Welcome to FedPM Pro. The goal of this channel is to essentially help out folks that are looking to get into program management or project management that are coming up and starting to deal with some of the things that many of us have dealt with for many years. I'm Jim O'Keefe, your host. I have been in the program management space for 20 years and have run programs, everything from just a handful of people up to over 700 right now. So I've experienced a lot of the issues that a program manager runs into, and I would love to be able to have a discussion with you to help your program management journey be better. And that's really what this whole thing is all about. So for those that have joined, if you are interested in dropping any comments or questions, please do so in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you. Certainly interested in finding out your transition experiences. So to start out, transitions, two things. Transitions are extremely stressful for everybody involved. They always are. For a PM, the transition starts when you get the notification that you've won the job. And that situation for a federal PM is a very, it's two-sided, right? Number one, you're super excited that you've won this new contract and you have this great opportunity, but at the same time, you're like, oh my gosh, we've won this contract. This is a terrifying opportunity. So that is the first experience that you kind of have when you are, first transitioning into a PM role, particularly if it's your very first. But there are also situations where you can go into a completely brand new contract where there isn't an existing incumbent or an existing vendor, and you have to kind of start from scratch. So transitions can involve moving from one vendor to another or just coming into a completely new contract and starting from scratch. And they are both unique and interesting. And I'm sure many of you that are watching have your own stories and experiences with transition. So tonight, what I wanted to do is just give you top 5 with some spares. So if you hang on until the end, you'll get a couple of extra suggestions around transitions. But the idea being that I'd like to share some of the challenges that I've gone through, certainly some of the ones that stick in my mind the most to try to prepare you, and then, certainly answer any questions that you may have, but also to assure you that you will get through them. Whatever comes your way during transition, you will find a way to get through. I have never been in a transition that has completely failed, and I've never had a situation where the contract's been taken away. Now, that being said, there are situations that can cause that. So again, transition is an incredibly important time for a whole host of reasons. The first is, number one, it's really the first time that a customer is going to see you and get to know you, right? Second, it's a time to show off your organizational, scheduling, and budgeting skills. Right, it's an opportunity for you to get things put together, get them rolling, and get operations going as quickly as possible. It's also an opportunity for you to show your leadership skills to your team. This will be the first time you're communicating with them and helping to lead and guide them through this process. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to be a leader as you're going through transition. But there are always the challenges and the bumps in the road. So I'm going to go through a handful of those with you tonight. And again, if you got any questions, any concerns, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be watching it as we go. Also, if you like this video, please consider liking the video itself and the stream, and consider subscribing. I will live stream usually every Thursday. Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time is when I'm on here to just talk about program management stuff. A lot of times as program managers, it can be really challenging because you may not have a lot of other program managers in your sphere, and sometimes it can feel like you're really alone. But you're not. There are an enormous number of other program managers out there, and a lot of those program managers want to help you succeed, and I'm one of them. So, and I'm sure we'll meet others as we go through this journey together. So the goal of these things is to provide you additional information about what it's been like to be a program manager for 20 years, talk a little bit about the federal space, answer questions, also talk about maybe new and interesting topics that are coming down the line. I spoke last week about Chat GPT, and I'm going to be speaking about Chat GPT next week a little bit. So we'll try to keep intermingle some current affairs in with the topics about talking about federal program management. So I look forward to walking this process with you and helping you to succeed in your program management journey. So first and foremost, I'll go through our, I've got a PowerPoint and I will share these with you. So let's go to our first page. I always start with just a little couple notes about the chat. I always call these an AMA, AMAA, ask me almost anything. And the reason I do that is because there's a couple of rules around this that I'll mention. My answers are completely unique to me. They are based on my personal experience. They may be incredibly different from what you are experiencing as a PM. You may have some really great insights. We could, arrive at a location through two different paths, both of which are absolutely valid. So again, as we're talking and chatting, please make sure we all remember that is, let's try to be helpful. Let's not try to be mean-spirited. We will ignore our trolls. We'll ignore bots that may come into the chat. So please bear with me on there, and let's support one another. As you know, I will go into some discussions about the challenges of being a PM from a mental health perspective. And a lot of times it's helpful for us to have some resources that we can reach out to and will support us when we're leading large, parts of the organization. Sometimes you don't have that leadership. So be supportive here if you can, and help with questions and things like that. So I appreciate that, positive environment. That's what we're trying to create here. These videos and live streams are not related to any or sponsored by any employer, customer, agency, past or present, and everything that I'm expressing here is going to be basically generalized to program management. And so I won't be answering questions about specifics related to previous customers, employers, etc. And I also obviously won't be answering too many things of a personal nature. Certainly be happy to talk about my experiences, but we'll keep those to a minimum. And then, as always, I kind of reserve the right not to answer any questions that I don't want to, just to keep us all having fun and enjoying ourselves as we go through this. So thank you for stopping by. And like I mentioned, have fun, enjoy yourself, ask questions, and enjoy this information that we're providing. Okay, so let's get into transition management and the transition traps. So when we start to transition, there are a whole host of things that hit us all at once. And so I want to kind of go through, like I mentioned earlier, is the traps that you can run into are going to be varied. They're going to depend on your particular contract. They're going to depend on your customer. They're going to depend on the type of contract, the environment you're in, whether there's an incumbent, how challenging that incumbent might be. All of those things can make transition completely different. But one thing doesn't change, and that's number one on our list, which is contracts and contractual obligations. All of us will have a contract in the federal space that we have to adhere to and follow. Now, the reason I put know your contract as number one is when I was first starting out, I remember talking to a contract specialist, and they will become some of your best friends. So if you know some contract specialists out there, give them a high five, because many, many times they have saved my bacon, so to speak, by helping me make the right decision in situations. So this contract specialist was talking to me, and the one thing they said was, know your contract, know your contract, know your contract. They literally said it 3 times because it is so wildly important when you're starting off to have that understanding of exactly word for word what your contract says. It can include so much information that you need to be absolutely aware of, particularly as a PM, that you need to read through it completely. Even if you were involved in the development of the proposal, or you were involved in reading the proposal or being part of some of the review, it is really important to get that contract in front of you, take some time and go through it on your own. Keep that contract somewhere close. I've always printed out the contract and had it in a binder just in case. Also keep it on a drive somewhere where it's secure and safe that you can access on a regular basis, because for the first year, probably, and even beyond, you will have to go back and reference that contract to verify certain things and make sure you're doing what the contract says you will do. So again, go through your contract with a fine-tooth comb, understand things like the period of performance, how the contract is set up, right? So a lot of contracts will have a base period and then they'll have option years. They may not have option years, or they may have option periods that are less than or more than a year. So just know the period of performance for your contract, because again, that's going to drive a lot of your deliverables and how you process and work through the contract. So for example, if you have a really short contract, you need to get transition through really quickly, get up and running into operations and start, doing things like innovating and stabilizing and improving the environment quickly, because you don't have as much time to work that through. If you have a 10-year contract, then you have an opportunity there to really make transition effective, make sure that you're setting a structure and foundation for the remainder of the contract that is solid and is going to allow you to grow and evolve through that 10 years. There can be very, very different situations. So know your period of performance, know your budget and the contract value. Those are things that a lot of people will ask. What is the total contract value of this opportunity? Know your customers. You have to know who the people are that are designated in the contract to be able to give you what they call technical direction. You'll hear that a lot. There are, in the contract, it's going to talk about things like your contracting officer. It might talk about a core, a contracting officer representative. You might also hear things like a TPOC, a technical point of contact. There's a dozen different acronyms that can be identified within the contract. And that's going to be super helpful, because you're going to want to know who those people are, because in a lot of situations, they are the only ones that can contractually direct your contract to do things, right? So you need to be really careful about how those interactions work. In the federal government, it is particularly important to make sure that you are only taking direction from an authorized government employee that is telling you, as part of their position on the contract, that you can do these things, or asking you to execute work. So it's really important to know those names and who they are. Also, when the contract is evaluated and your performance is evaluated, a lot of these folks can be on a technical evaluation board, or they can be part of an award fee discussion if you're a cost plus award fee contract, where they every 6 months might evaluate your contract and say, and give you a rating from 0 to 100, and that percentage is then multiplied by an award pool, and you'll actually get additional money as a result of that you can use either on your contract or as profitability for the company. So it's super important to know all those people and how that process works. You also have to look in the contract for things like assets, things that are going to be transferred into your contract. If there's any equipment that's going to be a part of the situation. What if you have facilities, right? If you're going to be taking over a facility, then you are going to need to have facilities management involved. You're going to have discussions with your facilities team, or in many cases, for those of us that have smaller contracts, you are the facilities manager. So congratulations and welcome to real estate. So I learned a lot when I was in the smaller contracts, getting space for the contract and being able to figure out where, how are we going to set up a call center and how's this going to work? And I learned an awful lot about the real estate environment in some of my earlier smaller contracts. Super exciting, but things, again, you may not know them going in, but there are plenty of people during that process that will help you through that and help you learn. Most likely, if you are with a government contractor, there'll be somebody that's gone through this before, or a facilities management person that can help walk you through that. It's in the contract. It might identify specific actions that you are required to take, like it might specify clearances or specific access to facilities that are required. It may talk about confidential information and how you have to manage it. So again, a lot of these clauses, just take the time to read through them in your contract. I promise you, if you memorize that contract or have it darn close to memorized, then when most of the big questions come up about, what have we proposed? What are we supposed to deliver? What are my deliverables? Those things are going to be available to you, and you're going to be able to act on them quickly. So again, like I mentioned, the other piece about the contract itself is, what did you propose that you were going to do? It's really important that you reread your proposal, right? So you get your contract and you also get your proposal. It might be a statement of work that you created. You may be operating off of a list of objectives or those kinds of things, but you put a response in. Your company put a response into a request for proposal, and that response needs to be read by you and understood by you, because that basically, particularly if it's incorporated into the contract, which many of them are, essentially your response becomes part of the contract, then you have to be really careful about what was promised in that contract and understand what you're expected to deliver, because it's not optional. Like there certainly can be optional sections, but if you've said that you're going to deliver a particular thing and you don't deliver, you could literally be in breach of contract. So be very, very careful and read that document. Make sure you understand what it is that you've promised, how you've decided and proposed that you're going to deliver it, and make sure that you do. Also keep an idea on things, keep an eye on things like the schedules and the budgets that you have proposed in that contract. They're going to be wildly important. So make sure that you know all of those pieces. And we'll get into some of those schedules and timelines and budgets a little bit later, because they're in the top 5. All of them, it's your basic project management stuff. So make sure you know your contract and you know your proposal, and that will save you over and over again, particularly in the first year. And especially if you're new to, program or project management, always refer to the contract. You can't get in trouble. If you respond, if a customer asks something and you don't feel like that's something you're supposed to do, and you go back to the contract and you read that it's not in the contract, then it's perfectly reasonable for you in a very professional way to respond back to the customer that it doesn't appear that this is in the contract, and you have a contracting officer involved and you discuss it. And you can have a modification added to the contract where that work is brought in. But it's important to know what's in there, right? So it's important to be an expert. You have to be an expert on your contract. Okay, so, and again, for anybody else that's joined during that process, we're talking about transition traps. These are all of the challenges and fun that you get into as you are starting a transition in the federal government space. If you have some suggestions, recommendations for our PMs out there on some of the key things that you worried about and you experienced during your transition, please consider dropping them in the comments in the live chat, or even on the video. Please help us all learn together about the challenges and fun that you've had to deal with over your career. Okay, so getting into number 2. And this is an interesting one, and I put it here because I've had multiple challenges with this particular one. It might not be everybody's number 2 on their list, but it's definitely mine. And the reason is that in your contract, a lot of times you will have subcontractors or partners, or you might be part of a joint venture. There may be other companies involved. You might have suppliers. You might have, other companies that are helping you deliver that service. It is really, really important for you to understand those relationships between you and those vendors and what is expected of that relationship. So for example, a lot of times you'll go into a program and you will have subcontractors. So in the federal space, you'll have a prime contractor who is responsible for the delivery of the program. They are able to then bring in subcontractors and other companies to help them deliver that contract. A lot of times your subcontractors will be chosen during the proposal period because they offer an additional advantage to you to winning the proposal. They may have a special skill or capability that your company doesn't have, or they may be experts with the customer. There are a lot of advantages to having subcontractors, and I've had as many as about 10 subcontractors on a contract. I have talked to program managers that have had something like 40 subcontractors. You can have any number. There's no limit really to that, other than manage your work share, which I'll get into. But so be aware of what you've proposed and what you just heard me say, work share. So a lot of times you and your subcontractors will agree to some percentage of work that they're going to perform. That's their work share. If you agree and specify that information in a teaming agreement and you qualify that number specifically, then those are targets that in your subcontract agreement you need to meet. So you got to be really careful about that and make sure that doesn't, cut into your expected revenue from a corporate perspective, and that it doesn't impact your staffing from your company's perspective as the prime. Those things can cause all kinds of challenges. So make sure you understand what that work share agreement is between you and your subcontractors. Not only that, make sure that you understand and flow down contractual clauses that are in the primary contract to your subcontractors. So when you get a subcontractor teaming agreement put together, a lot of times you're going to have to give that subcontractor a statement of work, which is, here, I'm telling you what you need to do. This is a list of all the things that you need to do as part of this agreement that we have. And in that list of things to do, if there are clauses that are specific to your prime contract that are really important, like you need to have a clearance and you need to follow these particular regulations when you're dealing with confidential information, all of those things need to flow down. In addition, things like service level agreements, SLAs. If you have a subcontractor that is delivering a portion of a contract, like a whole chunk, like maybe you've got a subcontractor that's delivering your mobile device management for the government, and there's an SLA in your main contract that is specific to, you need to deliver mobile devices within 7 days, right? That thing needs to flow down to your subcontractor to make sure, number one, they're aware of it, number two, they're sticking to it, and that you have something contractually that you can use to enforce that and make sure that you're not getting hit with non-compliance to an SLA because your subcontractor doesn't have a flow down clause. So again, talk to your contract specialist. You generally will be assigned someone within your company that is a contracts expert. Please use them. Ask them questions and make sure that you understand. Also, I'll mention, I took a government contracting course. They offer them. They're not super expensive. I would definitely recommend doing that. It helped me understand what a contract is and how they're set up and how they operate and those kinds of things. That's super helpful for us, because a lot of times we may be focused on operations. I was an IT person, so I was focused on IT operations. How do we deliver this? And then contracts came up and I'm like, what is this? It's an entirely new world with words and concepts that I may not have been exposed to. So I've got to learn those things. And if you take a government contracting course on the side, that will really help you understand how important your contracts are and how important these relationships are with these subcontractors and vendors. They'll generally have in that course information about what subcontracts are, how they work, how they operate, what kind of clauses and items do you need to have in them to make sure that you're getting the service that you expect from that subcontractor. So again, good idea to know those subcontracts and vendor relationships. Also, if you've got a partner that has to deliver, equipment or something, you need to make sure that that supplier agreement is in place and you understand exactly what they're going to be delivering. So for example, if you needed to, let's say, buy laptops for, a government agency, and you had to buy 1,500 at a time and manage the deployment of those things. If your vendor, is behind or is unable to deliver, then you are going to be responsible for having that communication with the government and explaining why it's happened, and make sure that they're not going to hold you, hold it against you in the evaluation of the contract. Maybe things like we dealt with over the past couple of years, which could be supply chain issues or chip shortages or anything that can cause a delay in the delivery that those pieces of equipment will impact your ability to get those pieces of equipment into your customers' hands. So again, make sure you understand the supplier agreements, any agreements that you have with your subcontractors and vendors. The other thing I'll mention, this is one of the pieces that I had an issue with, was also make sure that if you're working with small businesses, that you understand what kind of small business they are. And also, if you have small business targets that are required by the contract, you want to know those as well, so you can make sure that you meet those particular requirements. So there are certain contracts with certain government agencies where they say, okay, you can have this contract, but we need 30% small business, or 30% service disabled owned veteran small business, or women owned small business, or minority owned small business. There are a whole bunch of these different categories for small businesses that you'll hear hub zone. These are very specific and important to understand. And it's also good, just to be honest with you, if you're in if you're working with a large company, a lot of times you can kind of create a mentor-mentee relationship with these small businesses and help them out. Because the reality of the situation is that if you have a really good vendor that is small and they deliver fantastic service to you, then you're going to want to connect with them on a recurring basis. So again, again, you can have both sides of the spectrum. You can have good small business partners, and you can have small business partners that are, that have some challenges. So again, if if you are dealing with a great small business and you've worked with them over multiple contracts, then you can get into this mentor-mentee situation where they are actually mentored by a large business, so that you're contributing to small business success, and that's a great thing to be a part of. So again, make sure you understand what type of small business you're dealing with, if there are any requirements specific to the contract that require you to hit targets for those small businesses. And then also make sure, like I mentioned earlier, then what work share did you provide? Does that fit in with the, your total plan for delivery of services? And keep an eye on it. You're going to have to track that over time too, because a lot of times these things ebb and flow, right? You're going to need to make sure that those percentages are maintained, because a lot of times you might lose some people, right? They're just maybe attrition on the contract. And if you're not careful in managing it, if you don't know that this contractor just lost this person, I need to replace that person with that contractor, then sometimes it may not happen. You may hire somebody internal. You've got a great candidate that is sitting on the bench on another contract as part of your company. Then you may want to bring them in. But be aware that those things could impact work share, and they could flow down and be a problem. There are also going to be, targets and goals for you as a large business that you might have to adhere to too. Like your company may want over time to increase the percentage of people on the contract that are the prime contractor. That can be a goal that a large business could have. So over time, you might want to transition and transfer folks into your particular company. Again, it's all dependent upon the goals of your company, the contract that you have, and a relationship and contracts that you have with your subcontractors and vendors. So be aware of them. And the last thing I'll mention is that this is what caught me off guard, is when you are starting to do your staffing plan, and honestly, that should be done way before transition. So when you are starting to work on your staffing plan, make sure you understand all of your partners and subcontractors, and that you are allocating work to them correctly, number one. Also, consider how you're allocating work to them. So, for example, a couple things. Number one, it's hard to work with subcontractors that you have put in management roles, so senior management roles on the contract. Sometimes you have to do that as part of the agreement that you have with them. But I will say that when you have senior managers that are subcontractors, a lot of times you have challenges with, well, we can't really talk financials, and we can't really talk about certain things because I can't disclose this to you as a subcontractor, but I need you to plan. And so things I've run into there, just be aware of that. There's no problem with assigning that person, but just be aware of that relationship and what you've got to be careful about sharing. The other thing is, and this is the piece that I've been holding off telling you about, depending upon the small business, they may or may not be able to operate in all 50 states, right? So that is something that's absolutely critical for you to know. Is, for example, if you are delivering a CONUS, a Continental United States, that's what CONUS stands for, a Continental United States contract with people all over the place, and you assign a bunch of people that are going to be remote out of Oregon to a subcontractor, and they don't have the ability to operate in that state, then you've just opened up Pandora's box for you, because then you're going to have to reassign those people to a different subcontractor, and you're going to have to find other people to give to the subcontractor that is not able to operate in that state. It spins out of control, and I can tell you, I did this. It was a nightmare. It took days to recover from that, because I was a young PM. I didn't even think about that. So it's okay. It's not a problem if you have this happen. Trust me, a lot of people have, but this is one of those reasons why it's number 2 on my list, is because during transition, the last thing you want to do is be redoing your staffing plan because something like this came up. So know your vendors and understand exactly how they're delivering services and where they can operate, for goodness sakes. Know that. Okay. Number 3, technical and operational integration, right? So the reason this is number 3 is because one thing that I mentioned earlier is you have to understand what assets are coming with your contract, know your contract, and know what's being transitioned. But you also need to know what kind of systems are being operated on the contract and who owns them. So you will see things like GOCO, G-O-C-O, which is government-owned, contractor-operated. Or you may have a COCO, contractor-owned, contractor-operated. You may have a mixture of all of these different things and have and you need to understand who owns that equipment, how to manage it, how to integrate it with your existing contract, and what the plan is for its disposition should it fail. So, for example, if you have a piece of government equipment and you have to maintain it on a contractor site, you got to maintain and know where that piece of equipment is at all times. This becomes really challenging when you have government-owned laptops that are delivered to your staff. That's considered government furnished equipment. You'll hear the words GFE or the letters GFE all the time. You've got to make sure you know where that laptop is, and you're going to need to get it back if you have somebody leave the contract. So these are really important things to consider, is how you're going to manage how people do their jobs. Do they need a government issued laptop, or can they do it on a contractor owned laptop? Do they need specific access to these various systems? What kind of elevated privileges might they need to do their work within the IT space? So all of these kinds of things are involved in technical and operational integration, right? So you need to understand the environment and how you're delivering within it, and that's something that you should have a pretty good idea from the RFP response, because a lot of times when someone delivers and I may not have mentioned this earlier, RFP stands for request for proposal. You can also see things like request for information, RFI. That's generally a pre-RFP situation where they just want to find out some information from industry about if you're interested in potentially participating in this. Or also an RFI can allow you to offer suggestions to the government on how they might release a contract. But there's all kinds of different ways that a government can request a proposal or a quote from you. So RFP, RFQ is a request for quote. You'll see all these different things. All I'm saying is that you are going to deliver something to the government that is going to be a response to a request from them. You are going to have to act on that thing as it turns into your contract. So in this kind of situation, a lot of times that request for proposal or request for quote will have a list of assets and equipment and systems and technologies that the government is using or expects you to use. It might even include a list of all the software and those kinds of things. So it's great to have that information in front of you, because then okay, all of my call center staff need to have a government issued laptop, because they're not going to be able to VPN into the government environment without having that specific piece of equipment. Or there may be other reasons. There may be security requirements, or you may even have to extend a government network out to your contractor location. Or in the classified space, you literally people have to be on site. There's not an option to work remote. They physically have to be in the building with a piece of government issued equipment, and they can't take that government piece of equipment out of the building. They have to leave it there overnight. You got to be careful about all of these things. So understanding the technical and operational integration that's going to be occurring is going to make your life so much easier. So make sure you understand that. What kind of are you using? Can you deliver what you proposed? Is everything where it needs to be? Do you understand all of the technologies that you're going to be integrating? And also, as I mentioned earlier, you have phases like during transition, you want to focus on stabilization. You want to get the environment to where it's at least as good as it was when the other contractor left, if there's an incumbent, or just get it up to a stable state if you're coming in new. So stabilization is the name of the game when you're coming in to do a transition, because the faster you stabilize and get things running and operating, the faster you can get out of transition and begin doing things like innovating and moving your contract along and delivering emerging technologies and better cool stuff to the government. So again, make sure you understand systems, the processes as well. So I'll mention processes here. So a suggestion that I would have for you is Tiger teams are great. This is a group of people that are focused on a specific thing. So for example, as a PM, there's a handful of key roles that I would mention. The smaller the program, the more those key roles are going to be you. Okay, so that's okay. But the larger the program, the more these get to be split out. So you're going to want somebody at the beginning to be keeping an eye on financials. Okay, a lot of times this could be what they call a project controller or a budget analyst, or somebody that's keeping an eye on the finances, which might be the government budget, it might be your spend, it might be your invoicing, all of those kinds of financial aspects. You want somebody doing that. One of the most important roles that I ever had on a program was my business manager. I had absolutely one of the best business managers of all time. She was incredible. And, I always mention she was my brain. She kept things running that I was too scatterbrained to keep track of. And she was incredible. She was responsible for everything like procurement and making sure that deliverables were received by the government, making sure invoices were accepted, doing HR. It was a huge role. Even that can be split out the larger and larger the contract. Because in addition to her role as business manager, I also recommend having a resource manager. This is somebody that's going to be responsible for the people and making sure that you're staffed up all the time. Particularly with a transition, you will almost always have a transition manager. This is somebody that is assigned to your program to help you get through the transition space, and that's all they focus on. I've had, again, literally probably one of the best transition managers in my life. Multiple times I've worked with them. Incredible. That makes the job so much easier because during a transition, you as the PM need to really focus building a relationship with the customer. So a lot of this other stuff has to happen without your direct interaction because you simply need to be, you're going to be in meetings with them all the time because you're going to be setting up stuff and understanding how things work and talking to them about what they need and doing that kind of relationship building during the first couple months. It's really important. You're in there with them and they need to see you, and that needs to happen every day. So again, having these people is really important. So you'll have a transition manager. So as I said before, you're going to have a finance manager, generally a business manager that's going to deal with, like I said, the business office stuff, like I mentioned, procurements and invoicing and deliverables, and just making sure all that stuff is taken care of, as well as a million other jobs that are going to be thrown at you during that process that the transition manager can work with. You're going to need somebody that is specifically a resource manager. Somebody that's going to help you execute your staffing plan. I generally would recommend somebody that is responsible for business processes. So this person could be your quality manager, or it could be somebody that's dedicated to processes, because what they're going to need to do is you're going to need to have them and a group of people, if you're new to the contract, go in and usually monitor or watch the existing contractor as they are doing their jobs and record and gather all of the information about how they execute the work. So you need somebody that's going to be capturing all this. And also they're going to be capturing things like what's the current knowledge base? Like, where are key documents that are provided either from the government or the previous incumbent contractor that you need to get your hands on, read, and put into your own, repository. So you want somebody that is just dedicated to that works each part of your organization and says, did you get all of the documents that you need? Did you have an opportunity to mirror the staff when you were coming in? Did you get an opportunity to talk to maybe the government lead over that particular area? And they can check off all these boxes if they're focused on the business and quality delivery piece. And then, certainly last but not least, you're going to have a contract specialist and somebody that's responsible for the contract side of the house, which is, did you meet all your deliverables? The quality manager also, by the way, can be responsible for SLAs. That's going to be a huge deal as you start to roll it out, because if you're new to a particular environment, sometimes those SLAs are just proposed and you're really not sure how they're going to be delivered. That means that in that situation, you're going to want somebody that is a quality manager that can focus on the delivery of SLAs and understand, because a lot of times when they're ranking or rating a contract, what they care about is how you perform on your SLAs. It's kind of an objective measure. They can see the numbers. And if they're red, that's bad, right? And so they're an important thing to focus on, particularly when you're starting out, to make sure those SLAs are good. So again, those 5 different roles, as I mentioned, can be collapsed into just you if you're on a small contract. But if you're able to get those people identified and delivered, that is a much better setup for you to be able to spend the customer, work out and hash out that relationship. You're going to be working with them for years, so it's best to get off on the right foot and make sure that you're, right there with them and you're, supporting them and delivering exactly what they need. So again, try to get those folks involved, and that's your technical and operational integration. You've heard me mention budget a million times. So why is this so important? Okay, so in the federal government space, you may deliver a proposal that has a cost estimate on it. Okay. And that cost estimate is your expected, your proposed burn. Like, it's going to cost us this much to deliver this contract, right? And you as a PM understand what that proposal is and how many people are involved. And then you need to take that, keep it to the side, and then you need to also discuss with your customer if they have a budget that is really, specific and important and maybe different from the number that you proposed. I've been on situations where that's the case, where you may have proposed something huge that included 10 years of evolution and really cool new technologies, and your customer comes back and says, well, I've got a budget third of that size, so yeah, that's what you're going to deliver. It's in my top 5 for a reason, because if you miss this, then you could very easily overburn during your first year and have to do a massive reduction in force if you don't know what the customer's budget is versus what your burn is. So I cannot stress it enough. You do not want to get in that situation. Number one, looks bad because you're not managing, the costs of the contract according to the customer. Even if you didn't get, a budget from them until, sometime into the year, it's still on you. Number two, you have a situation where you're going to have to, terminate a whole bunch of people in the middle of your base year when you're delivering your services. And number three, if you terminate those people, what happens to your service delivery? Are you still going to be able to operate, or are you in big trouble, from that perspective? Are you like, well, we're not actually going to be able to deliver these services anymore? That's something you really need to be aware of, because then you could be running into the end of your first year when the government may be evaluating if they should give you your your follow-on years, right? Your option years. And you've got a situation where you're overrunning on budget, you're firing a lot of people, and you start to miss SLAs. It is absolutely the worst possible situation that you can be in. So again, try to figure out very, very early on what the budget is you need to hit, and hit that budget. One of the biggest things that PMs care about is making sure that budget is hit, right? You want to hit it. You can't overrun. In many situations, the government simply doesn't have any more money. So if you overrun that budget, you're eating all of that cost. It's coming straight out of your bottom line, because the government's not going to give you more money unless it's obligated and allocated to the contract. So be really careful. You got to make sure that you're tracking all of that stuff. It is one of the most important pieces, particularly during transition and as you kick off your first year. So really be careful. The other thing, be super careful about changes in scope. When you're having discussions with your customer and you have this really cool idea, like, oh, I'm delivering a service desk, and what I'd really like to do is I'd like to add this kiosk capability. It's really cool, and it'll allow your customers to come on in, and all they got to do is walk up to this kiosk and they get magic IT equipment. That sounds like a great idea. And the customer says, oh, I love that. Yes, let's do that. And then now you're stuck with trying to deliver this kiosk, but you haven't talked about, well, customer, that's actually going to cost an extra $150,000 to develop that system and deploy it and do all those kinds of things. Be really careful when you're talking about scope elements, right? You got to be really, really careful that you're not adding scope without commensurate cost, right? So you can't just continue to add scope without talking to the government about, hey, I just added 14 people. That's going to cost extra money. Is it in the budget? Do you have allocated finances? Are we sure? Double, triple check those things before you start to hire people. So again, scope creep happens all the time. I think, if you've been a PM for any amount of time, you've dealt with scope creep. And that can be, internally driven from yourself because you put a great idea and you really wanted to execute it and make your customer happy, but they didn't have any extra money. So what do? Well, that's, we have to innovate. It's part of our innovation plan. Then who pays for that? And you can very quickly get out of whack between, something like the scope of the contract and the what the government can pay and budget and what you can charge them. So keep all that in mind. Changes in scope and requirements need to be documented. You generally are going to want to deliver a response request to the change in scope. You want to document it, respond to it, and provide a cost estimate with the change in scope back to the government. It's the best, safest way. It'll cover all your bases. And like I mentioned, you also want to include the basics of project management. You want to schedule, and you might even talk about resource requirements. You just want to have an idea, because sometimes too, scope changes may be compression or expansion of timelines that you've also got to be aware of. If you have you say, okay, we have a 3-month transition. 3 months is very common. It's not always what it is, but 3 months is a common time for transition for you to get through and start delivering that contract fully after those 3 months. Now, what happens if in the middle of this, the government, says, well, I know we said 3 months, but hey, we've got this big thing happening in 2.5 months. We need this thing to go live here. And you say to the government, well, okay, that is a compression of time. Number one, we may not have the resources to deliver this to you in that time frame. Or number two, it may add risk to the delivery of this thing, or both. So again, to really be careful about how you respond and how you look at those kinds of requests from the government. Always, I can't stress this enough, always respond in writing. Always, no matter what. I can't stress that enough. And save everything, right? Save everything that you provide back to the government when it comes to anything like changes in the contract, right? Those changes are going to need to go through a contractual modification, and they're going to need to be documented. And you keep every shred of documentation that you have around that. Make sure you have a folder, whether it's electronic or physical, just make sure you've got it. Because if you get down the line, a couple months, everybody forgets. What did we talk about? Was that a thing? Did that really happen? And unless you have the documentation where you had this discussion and per this meeting, this is what happened and this is what we agreed to, it doesn't exist. So a lot of times you'll hear service desks say, if it's not in the ticket, it didn't happen. If you don't have it documented, it did not happen. So please, 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 it has saved me over and over again to make sure that I've documented all of the information. And that information is not just about changes, but it's also really good to document good things that you've done, innovations that you've put together, or ways that your customer may have given you kudos along the line. Keep all of that, because when you get ready for an award fee, or you get ready for an evaluation, or a contractor performance assessment, a CPAR, which ends up, it can be public record, where they evaluate your performance over a year, then you want to be able to provide these artifacts to the government and say, FYI, this is what we did during this year. I want to make sure you remember it, because they and you will not just get it from memory. They won't even remember it. But then if you've got this in documentation, you can hand it to them and say, hey, just an FYI, these are the things that happened over the last 6 months. And they'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, I forgot about that. And you'll be the same way. When you get it from your leads, you'll forget about it. And the other thing I'll say about documentation, and I know I'm running on this, but I can't stress it enough, is if you have groups underneath you, make sure that you are documenting this stuff on a monthly basis at a minimum. Because if you go beyond a month and you try to get it all documented in a quarter, you will literally forget 50% of the things that you did during that time. If you do it each month, then you can kind of add it all together. And when you have to give a quarterly review, or you have to give a mid-year review, you're going to have the documentation already there. It's a great opportunity for you to collect all that in, put it together, and have it in one nice document to give to the government. And it's less stress. Trust me, you don't try to remember and document 6 months worth of work in 2 days. So yeah, definitely retain that stuff up front. Get a data management strategy. I got to stress this too. I've run into this a bunch of times. There are tons of repositories that you use to figure out what you're going to do and use that system. You might have, like I've run into this many times, like where I'll have Teams, I'll have SharePoint, I'll have my email, I'll also have things like Zoom, and all of these elements might even have chat associated with them. And I'll also have texts on my phone, and I'll also, have to write down what I had on a phone call when I just, so I've got a OneNote. And literally it becomes overwhelming to have all these things scattered around in all different locations. So think about a data management system when you're doing all of this. So make sure you've got your budget there, you've got your contract, and you've got notes that are related to contract performance all in one place. Can't stress it enough. It will be extremely beneficial to you in the long run. So I just saw a comment come in. So C Snappy says, looking to start working on obtaining my PMP. The info you share is so good and a solid foundation. Thank you for creating this and sharing your knowledge. Thank you, C Snappy. I appreciate it. And good for you for going after your PMP. In one of the previous live streams, I talked about some of the things you kind of need right off the bat. You are doing exactly what you need to do, which is definitely get that PMP. That is, for government contracting, it is absolutely, a critical and often required. Like, you can't even be a program manager in a lot of these contracts without a PMP in there. The other ones that I would recommend that show up is ITIL. And for some contracts, you'll see things like, if you're doing a software contract, you'll see things like Agile, DevOps, see some of those things. But the big two, and I've had them behind my name my entire career is PMP and ITIL, and they just show up everywhere. So great job, number one, in planning that. And I will say, the PMP is a pain in the tail. It just is. So there are a whole bunch of strategies out there. What the best way is to study for this, and how to plan for it. There's a lot of information that needs to be covered. I will honestly say, the first time I got my PMP, one of the most stressful moments of my life is it's electronic, and as soon as you hit submit and it begins to calculate your score, it takes a ridiculously long amount of time. Like, it should know immediately, but I think they just have you sit there so they can record the stress, of your moments of panic as you're waiting to get your score. But it was literally like 10 seconds of the worst time of my life, and then luckily I passed. Now, again, I also recommend potentially going to a boot camp. They are fantastic. A lot of times these instructors are very familiar with ideas and methodologies that'll help you pass the exams. It's just like the SATs. There are ways that you can game the system to do better on it. And also, there's know how you learn and how you perform the best. There are some people that are great at cramming. There are some that really need some time on this, and so you can plan it out. Like, I'd like to take a couple months to go through this monstrous tome that they give you for the PMP, and I'd like to build flashcards, and I'd like to take my time, and I'd like to build that knowledge quickly so I feel comfortable when I go in. Great. But I will also tell you that you need to be prepared, which in your case, going ahead and getting your PMP is a fantastic opportunity, because I have been involved in situations where a PM that was selected for a contract has moved on by the time it's awarded. They're no longer available, and immediately begins the chaotic search. Oh my gosh, we've got to find another program manager. And if you happen to be in the mix and you're looking to get your foot in the door, and they realize, oh my gosh, this person has got a PMP, they have an ITIL cert, they qualify, we can get them in, and you get an opportunity to just slide right into a program. I've seen it happen. I'm not kidding, more than once, where you just start to search for people that have these certifications. So absolutely awesome that you're doing that, and good luck. I know you will do great on it. Take your time, and again, learn your studying style, and follow that, and you will succeed. And again, boot camps are your friend. So good luck, and please let us know how it goes. I know for many PMs, it's one of the stressful, elements of getting any kind of certification that you'll ever deal with. But it will be over quick, and you'll do great. Okay, so thank you for stopping by. Okay, so number 5, this is the last one, and we're almost out of time. So I may hold some of the bonus items or really quickly go through them at the end. Thank you, C Snappy. I appreciate that. C Snappy says, you're such a gem, telling everyone about your channel. I can't thank you enough. I appreciate it. We are here to help. So hopefully this is encouraging, and for any of the PMs that are watching, that you are encouraged. You're not alone, and you're going to be able to do this. So we'll help you get through it. Okay. The last one is scheduling and timeline. I briefly talked about this when we were talking about scope creep and things like that, making sure that you're giving your teams enough time to complete some of the action they need. It's really important during transition to be communicating a lot. So one thing that happens a lot of times is you'll have a daily stand-up. I just recommend this. It's a lot of work, but the daily stand-up will allow you to have a quick touch base. And again, if you've ever been involved in Scrum, that's really the way this needs to be. It's not a time to have these long discussions and have this thing take 2 hours. It literally has to be, like, even for large contracts, no more than 30 minutes, because you will get exhausted. It's a painful start to the day. Unless there's an absolute disaster that needs your direct, action immediately, then quickly go through the updates, and you'll be good to go. And the reason that I say this is that, particularly for things like application development and stuff like that, there are timelines and sprints involved. You really want to make sure you're getting feedback from your team on how they're doing. Are they going to make this? Is this working? Do you have your timelines and schedules documented? So again, another one I can't stress enough. You got to have project plans. You just got to. Please learn them. Please go through and learn either Microsoft Project, or understand that if you're in the IT space, you might have to learn something like ServiceNow or some other type of system, but they'll all have the same things, which is you're going to have, a lot of times you need a business case for the project. You need to describe it, explain it. It's going to be asked to put a cost estimate there and understand it. Then there's also obviously going to be a schedule. This is where you put your schedule, and it'll allow you to track tasks and subtasks. Again, as the PM, this is not something you have to do, right? But if you have projects that are you have team leads assigned to, you must make sure that you are using some uniform tracking system, because demand or the requests that are coming from your customer, their demands, we call it demand management, need to be tracked. You need to understand the flow and request of work and the capacity of your team to deliver, right? Those things have to be in line, because a lot of times they will get out of line, particularly during transition, because everybody's going to be throwing stuff at you. And if you try to grab all of it, you're going to end up wiping your team out, and you're going to have people leave, which gets even worse. So again, timeline and schedule are super important, because you have to understand the capacity of your team to deliver, and you're not overwhelming. You're keeping in touch during this whole process. How are you doing? How is your schedule? Are you okay? Have you met all the milestones? Have you completed the deliverables? How is your team doing? Are they burning out? Are they working extra hours? Are you seeing additional cost? Particularly for things where there's a cost plus element and you've got people that are able to bill overtime. Be really cognizant of that. If they're crunching the schedule and they're billing overtime, now you have a schedule impact to your finances that you need to be aware of and be tracking. So again, I think it's really important to understand the dependencies and things that have to occur in a schedule. Have a master schedule. I'm telling you, it will save your life, because as a PM, you could have dozens and dozens of projects that are sitting underneath you that are managed by professionals, so you don't have to worry about the management of them. But it's really going to be very important when you have these conversations with your customer to be able to look at your demand, schedule and say, we are at 130% on this task right now, which means that we cannot take on any more in that task until we get that number below 100 again and free up resources. Because when you show the customer the numbers, it'll save you. You'll be able to have a real conversation with them, and they'll be able to see the numbers, and you can be transparent and say, this is why we can't deliver this thing right now, unless you want us to bring on another team, or unless you want us to do something else like move another part of the schedule out, or just prioritize things differently. Those are all discussions that are going to be surrounding this schedule and timeline element of your transition. So all I can say is, please keep an eye on that. Make sure that you're following those schedules and you're keeping your team safe and happy and not burning everybody out. Okay, that's it. Can you believe it? 5 transition traps in an hour. So I do have another slide that's got some extra bonuses. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to that. We've only got about 2 minutes left, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But there are tons and tons of other mini transition traps that you're going to run into. So just be aware, this isn't a definitive list, and hopefully other PMs can share experiences they've had and transitions that they see that you need to watch out for. Big landmines that are sitting out there that I may never have run into. We can all share and help each other, because again, learning together as PMs is going to be the best thing we can possibly do. I can't stress this enough. When you become a PM, the number of people that can relate to your life changes dramatically. Okay, because a lot of times your subordinates are not going to understand how many people are vying for your attention and why. Also, the managers that are above you are not managing day-to-day operations, so they may forget what it was like to have people constantly asking for your time. So again, it's hugely important for you to have a support structure and find other PMs and watch videos like this to be encouraged that you're not alone. There are tons and tons of PMs out there that are going through the things that you are, and we can make it. I can tell you that I've been in this game 20 years, and I've enjoyed it. I've met some of the most incredible people. I've been inspired by my teams. I've been excited about new opportunities and continuing to grow my knowledge base and understanding these things. So it can be very rewarding to stick with it, but it can also be really stressful. So hang in there and follow some of these steps, around these transition traps to prepare yourself for your big new contract. Because number one, you can do it, and number two, you can be really successful if you focus on avoiding the traps and delivering your customer. Now, right before we go, I'll mention the last 5, which is stakeholder management, really quickly. to know your customer and all the people that are going to be critical to your contract. That can be internal and external. You need to know your folks. You need to know your customer and their folks. Quality assurance, I already mentioned, making sure that your processes and procedures are working. Data management and security, we talked about this. It's not just the physical object, but it can also be the software. It can be the artifacts that live in the electronic space. You're going to have to manage and control them. Change management, you heard me before, scope creep. That's a change management element. So when changes come up, they need to be documented, watched. You need to understand any downstream dependencies. Keep an eye on all those pieces. Performance monitoring and evaluation, your SLAs. Make sure you're hitting them. Make sure you understand if you're not, why. What can you do to improve them? These extra 5 ones, again, they may be critical to some PMs, but they may be not so important to others. So take everything that I'm saying with salt. These are things that I've experienced. You may have a completely different experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we share with each other and provide the feedback, it's at least something to keep in your periphery and keep your eyes on as you're starting your new contract. I know you're going to do fantastic. I truly appreciate you spending the time with us to talk about these things and learn and get better prepared, for the next big thing that you're going to be dealing with. You'll be a better PM overall. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for, if you did enjoy the content, please feel free to check the like button and also the subscribe button if you want to hear more content. As I mentioned before, I will be here almost every Thursday to talk about program and project management, and also even things like modern stuff that's coming up. I think next week we'll be talking about more about ChatGPT and some of the really cool things that are happening there, especially in the Teams space. So we'll talk about how you can make your meetings more effective with ChatGPT. So thank you for stopping by. Keep leading and keep being the best you can be. Thank you.